Hello, I'm Mr. Thompson, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about theories of American government, or really the influences that helped to shape how the founding fathers felt about early American government and basically setting up the stage going from the Articles of Confederation and the Declaration into our Constitution, or our current form of government that we're looking at. Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is, and kind of put it in a big picture theme here, is we're going to get a lot of ideas, or the founding fathers are going to get a lot of ideas. They're brilliant men, but they really look at ideas from the past to kind of help lead them and guide them in the future today. One of the first areas that they're going to be looking at is the Greeks and Romans, the early direct democracies, and also the administration activities of the Romans. Second thing we're going to look at is the ideas from England. Since we are English colonies and we've had English ideas from very long back, we're going to use a lot of these ideas. Even though we're moving away from an absolute monarch or a divine right theory and getting into more of a social contract, we're going to borrow some things that have happened in English history dealing with Parliament's move and growth that pulled away from the absolute monarch throughout history. And then lastly that we're going to look at, we're going to look at ideas from America. Basically how these ideas came from Europe, came from the Greeks and Romans, came from the French in the Enlightenment period, and found their way into America, onto our soil in Jamestown, and then later on into the States as we grew as a young country here. Okay? Well, here we go. First thing we want to look at is dealing with ancient philosophers, political philosophers. One of the first people that we want to look at is a guy named Plato. Okay, Plato was a Greek philosopher, brilliant man, who would go around and look at the state of Greece and understand that there are certain roles that each individual plays. And part of that role is civic virtue. Understanding that within your organization or within your state or within your community, people have certain roles that they have to play and participate within, not only just living day to day, but also in the bigger picture in their community. He is also going to have some important students that he's going to bring in. First of all, he is a student of Socrates, who was a brilliant teacher for Plato, and then he's also going to be teaching Aristotle. So these three men, Socrates first of all, then Plato, then Aristotle, are extremely important people to know about early ancient or age of antiquity political philosophers. One of the things that are going to come out of this is those who govern must be wise leaders to oversee the community in the direction the community is going. And that is very important. We're also looking at purposes of government is to help people learn about and perform. Remember those civic virtues and also moral duties kind of go hand in hand. What our community wants. Examples of trying to get rid of theft and murder and just moral things that we believe that should not be happening in a community to help set that foundation so that future generations can understand and learn. So from the age of antiquity, these people are very important, from Socrates, Plato to Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle, very important teacher of Alexander the Great, who was a phenomenal leader. You'll learn more about him in world history and in European history later on. Okay? Studied government, brought in the idea of logic and ethics, which will lead also to morals. Believed that there's a beauty and poetry of government, and also the study of biology. Okay, the study of plants and animals, and not only plants and animals, but also eventually getting into people and how people think. He believed in three things. He believed that every government should have. First of all, it's decide public policy, create laws that all community can follow, and in these laws that we have to be recognized that everybody is underneath them. Also carry out published policies. Who's going to enforce these policies along the way? So you have an executive. Creating law, you have a legislative branch, and then under the publishing policy, implementing, you have the executive. And then last, the idea of interpreting law or the judicial branch. These are all three important here, and they'll lead eventually to our three branches of government. Okay? Also with the Greeks and Romans, you're going to start understanding that there's a direct democracy, that everybody participates, that everybody has a voice. Something that we take for granted today, that concept of popular sovereignty, we're going to take from the Greek direct democracies and also the Romans as they took it a step further in the administration idea. And the key thing is that democracies will eventually could end in tyranny, especially with the abuse of the majority over the minority when it comes to class warfare, rich versus poor, poor rising up, taking over the rich. That could be a danger here that we'll look up throughout our history. So we'll look at direct democracies can be dangerous if you allow certain majorities to take advantage of the minorities. Okay? Now, I want to shift to the next area of our big picture ideas and get into English influences. One of the first documents you will want to know about is the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is going to come around in about 1215. This is, remember that England is an absolute monarch, meaning that they're run by a king throughout their history. Since being the king is divine, meaning that he has the God, our God, basically filtering his powers through the king, and he can control the people. But what happens is eventually some kings abuse the power. They're mean and evil, and they start to abuse those powers. A group of nobles or rich landlords, farmers or whatever, start to rise up in 1215, especially against a king named King John. And King John was very evil, and he brought in taxes against the people and treated them very poorly. So what eventually happens is these nobles rose up and said, King John, we'd still like you as king, we want you to be king, but we need you to sign a document that is going to start to limit your powers and shift that powers away from the king to an early legislative body called Parliament. So this is an important, almost a foundational document, the way we talk about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. This is going to be the first document that places limits on the powers of the king in England. So you start seeing that shift from an absolute monarch or strong centralized power into Parliament, basically starting to exert its power throughout that time. Okay? Here are some examples of the Magna Carta. Maybe you recognize some of these from our community in the United States here within our Bill of Rights. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of rights or possessions or outlawed or exiled or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or jury of his peers or by the land. And these are ideas that we're going to take during that time and eventually bring into our country under the Magna Carta. Here's another one. No one will sell. To no one deny or delay rights or justices. These are important constitutional ideas that we take today. From the Magna Carta, we grow into the English Bill of Rights in 1689. Okay? It's just that next idea. England, of course, does not have its own constitution. It has a series of documents, and this is the next in a series of documents building off the Magna Carta. Okay? This one basically brings in free elections to Parliament, right to fair trials, also eliminating cruel and unusual punishment, especially with the English. They love to quarter people, and they love to do some very evil things to people who are accused of crimes, and that was going to be done away with. And eventually, this is going to lead to our 8th Amendment in our Bill of Rights and the Constitution of no cruel and unusual punishments that we'll talk about later this year. Okay? Key guy you should know, John Locke, British philosopher, political philosopher. Love the mullet here. Could fit right in with Wausau. Now, one of the things that he's going to look at here is he believes in natural rights. We all, as individuals, live in nature. And when we live in nature, we have basically isolated ourselves with buildings and roads and comforts of heat and whatever else. But technically, we live in nature. And each and every person that is born in the nature has 3 major natural rights. And these are the natural right of life, the natural right of liberty, and the natural right of property. And that all governments, whether it's a king, whether it's democracy, or whatever else, they cannot take away those without the idea of due process. And he also creates this idea called a social contract, that we as human beings cannot do everything for the community. So we come together as a community to create an entity called government, and we create that social contract. We give away free will, or basically anything that we want to do to create this government to do some of the heavy lifting, like create defense, create roads, police state, those kinds of things that we cannot do ourselves. So when we form societies, we do that to protect these natural rights, and John Locke is an important philosopher that the Founding Fathers are going to borrow information from, especially Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay? Another guy that we're going to borrow from is in the Enlightenment period, a Frenchman named Baron de Montesquieu. He's going to come up with this idea that if the people are going to give away certain powers and give it to a certain government, we want to make sure that we protect ourselves from the government turning on us. So he says if you're going to give up power, make sure you divide it amongst 3 entities, or separate it. So this is what gives us today our president, the executive branch, our legislative or lawmaking here, and the judicial. These 3 are separate, but they're also equal. They check each other so that the power is not abused on the people. So that's very important. So the Founding Fathers look back to Montesquieu to understand that even though we're giving away power, we make sure that we check that power overall. Okay? Now, let's shift gears from Europe and come into America here. As the Americans were as the English were coming into the New World, North America here, some of the first groups are going to be pushed out based on pursuit of religion. And this first group here, called the Pilgrims, are going to come into the Cape Cod, Boston area via a bad storm. They were supposed to come to Jamestown, but that's a whole other story. The key idea here is that the Pilgrims, as they come into November of a year, they land in the Cape Cod area and they decide we need to create a document or a social contract that if we get off the ship and everybody goes in their separate ways, we're all dead. We need to bind ourselves to the social contract, and that we're going to agree to work together, and we're going to have a civil body politic, or basically an early form of government that is going to manifest or create itself in North America. So the Mayflower Compact is going to be our first social contract from the English standpoint. Of course, Native Americans have been around and other entities, but this is going to be the first social contract of Europeans coming over in the form of pilgrims setting this up. So you can see some of the European ideas coming into North America in that contract. Okay? Also in the American influences, you got to remember, we are going to have states in our country before a national government. And a lot of the states following the American Revolution, when we kicked Britain out after we won the American Revolution, are going to be creating their own state constitutions. And these state constitutions are going to be bringing in a lot of the idea that our founding fathers later on in 1787 in Philadelphia are going to borrow from. The idea of popular sovereignty, the idea of Bill of Rights, the ideas of majority rules and representation are going to come from early state constitutions to help bring in our national constitution in the United States here. Okay? So you can see some of the influence that the founding fathers are going to be taking from each and every state from then on. And they're going to create important foundational ideas that are going to lead our founding fathers in those documents. Okay? Now, another document, a foundational document, kind of like the Magna Carta, is the Declaration of Independence. What you need to understand about this document is that it's our philosophy. This is our birth certificate, okay, as a nation. And this document discusses specifically the philosophy that we see in government. Remember, we just fought a war. We just defeated the English in the American Revolution. We wanted to shift away from a king. And one of the first documents we brought in was the Articles of Confederation, which was a loose confederation of states, which we'll talk about. But the key idea that comes out of the Declaration of Independence is the idea of natural rights, borrowed from John Locke. That's all of us, that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, or pursuit of property. And we also believe the idea that is the government gets its power from the governed, us, the people. That the power is in the people. The citizen is the highest part of our government overall. And by doing this, we limit our government. It does not become overpowering, and you're going to see this as a common theme throughout this year in history here, dealing with power of the people, meaning the states, over national government, and vice versa, especially as we get into the concept of federalism and that whole system, which is one of our principles that we're going to talk about. Okay? Declaration of Independence brings us into our Articles of Confederation. This was our first national government. Of course, we know this is a temporary government. There are some major weaknesses, which you guys will be reading about this summer and talking about specifically in commerce and taxes and military. And eventually, we're going to replace it. And it's going to run from 1781 to about 1787. And we will replace it in that steamy summer in Philadelphia in 1787 with our current government called the Constitution, which we're going to be looking at. Key things that you should come out of this is that government in our history should be the servant, not the master. We control it. The people control it. The people are the government. And basically, our government is created with a piece of paper. We have a fundamental higher law. And that fundamental higher law limits the power that the people give up to the Constitution. Okay? So it does not become tyrannical against us. So key ideas, founding fathers do not believe that a direct democracy is the best model. Okay? Because it would become tyrannical. It could fail to protect the rights of the minorities against the majority, and it could fail to protect property rights. Okay? So lastly, as we look at this here, there's an evolution. We started out with Plato, you like the Plato here, okay? And Aristotle and Socrates as we move up here. The fall of the Greeks and the Romans bring in the feudalistic time period and the rise of the kings. And as the kings rise up and became divine right and very powerful, they eventually get checked by the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, and eventually there's going to be a shift from English kings to the Parliament. And then into the influences of North America, we see John Locke coming in, Barrington Montesquieu, state governments, Declaration of Independence, and then Articles of Confederation, which basically creates